Welcome to episode 39. This episode is an interview with Dave Nelson of Equity Maps. Enjoy.
Welcome to another week of the High Tech Podcast, joined by Will, my co-host, who's here.
Yo, what's up?
There he is. And myself. My name's Josh. You know, if you just listened to us for the first time.
What?
Yeah.
Huh? Your name's
What?
Josh?
Yeah, I know. Surprise.
No.
Yeah, I
Your name's
changed it.
Swartz.
Yeah, well, you know, some people do know me as that. You know, my friends call me that, and strangers now, apparently, if they listen to this episode, you can call me Swartz. So welcome back, guys. Another week. We got an exciting week for you this week. We're doing an interview this week, talking to somebody that we've talked about in season 1, because we got seasons now, and we're nerds and keep bringing attention to it.
Fourth wall.
Yeah, fourth wall. So if those of you who listened to our Equity Maps episode from season 1, we got a chance to connect with Dave Nelson, the founder of Equity Maps, who is quite the interesting guy, and lives in a lot of different places, and done a lot of cool things. But I got a chance to talk to Dave Nelson about Equity Maps. So excited for that today. As you get to check that out and listen to that. Before we do our normal new season 2 spiel, because we're trying to be better about this stuff, we're on the internet, or the interwebs, as some call it. It's mainly me.
Webs too soon, Spider-Man. It was so good.
Oh, yes. So good. Anyway, so check us out there. We are on Twitter. You can find us at High Tech Podcast. Make sure to subscribe and follow and talk to us. We keep saying this every episode, but nobody talks to us, guys. You know, y'all listen to us.
We're all alone.
But we're all alone.
There's
you know?
no one here.
So we want to talk to you more.
To
So
tweet
throw
us.
out some stuff, you know, make some suggestions. If you have a cool app, or you're just like, hey, I checked out this episode and you guys sounded lame. You know, whatever you want to do, let us know on Twitter at High Tech Podcast. Or you can also, if you don't want it to be in the public sphere, you can also email us. That's still a thing. At inbox at hightechpod.us. And then also we have a website. So if you're listening to us on one of the podcast platforms, that's how you found us: Spotify, Google, Apple, whatever you may, one of the other random ones that were apparently put on that I still don't really know their name, but
names, like
you know,
Buzzsprout
whatever.
and I don't know.
It's a thing. And you haven't checked out our website, make sure to check it out. Each episode comes with a cool little resource page that talks about the app that we're doing, or gives you a little bit more information about the person we talked with. And so you can find that at hightechpod.us or .us, however you want to pronounce it. I like .us. I feel like it feels more personal.
Hightechpod.us. Come join us.
You know, we're there. We're at that website. You can check us out. And then also, you can also check us out on Anchor at anchor.fm/hightechpod. And you can also find where all of our episodes are released from Anchor.
Anchor, apparently, I wanted to pull it up. I was curious. So it gets us on Spotify, of course, Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Overcast, Breaker, Castbox, Pocket Cast, Radio Public, and Stitcher, if you use any of those.
Yeah. Basically, the first handful that you said, and Stitcher, I know. In the middle ones, I didn't know were a thing until Anchor was like, do you want to release there? And we were like, I guess. Sure. I'm sure there's somebody who listens there. Anyway, so check us out online. You can find us there. So with that, though, let's jump in to our interview with Dave Nelson and learn a little bit more about how Equity Maps came to exist and some of the pedagogy that inspired this really cool app.
Okay, so now that we've turned from the introduction, we are here today, Josh and I, with Dave Nelson. He is the founder, creator, idea generator of Equity
You rhymed
Maps.
there. That was nice.
Yeah.
Good
Didn't
job.
even have that written down. It's great.
Yeah, that was solid.
He's also full-time the principal of the American Community Schools of Athens. So this is a gentleman we're finding out is pretty robust in his responsibilities and presence. He's present both in the international space and in the United States space. We're very excited to have you with us today, Dave. How are you doing today?
Fantastic. Thanks, you guys. And congratulations. You're going on, 40 episodes now?
Just about.
Yeah,
coming
just
up
about.
on it.
Yeah.
I think this is episode 39, but we've already recorded 40, so it's fine.
Yeah,
We've got it ready to go.
What do you mean? No, we didn't record it yet. That's next week. We record every week.
Now,
and Happy New Year too, by the way.
I know this is fantastic for us. This is season 2. We're in 2022 with the release of this episode, so we're just having so much fun with the process. Um, you mentioned to us beforehand as we're getting started, you grew up in the States, you grew up in Oregon, or originally from Oregon, but now you're international. What country are you in? I missed that.
Yeah, and I'm in Greece. I've been in Greece for the last 20 years, actually. And I also work out of the United States. I'm originally from Oregon and grew up on the coast in Oregon and taught in the Hillsborough district for many years.
Wow.
So international scene took me by the biggest attraction. And I've been in the international scene of K through 12 education ever since.
Wow.
Wow.
I'm assuming I have very little knowledge of Greece that it's pretty, temperate year round. Are you in a cold season as we go into winter, or are you just in the
Yeah.
middle of summer? I don't even know.
Now, right now, it's cold as can be. It's windy and stormy outside, and snow is coming soon. So we don't get
Okay.
much snow in the city, but every few years we get a snow day or two. Yeah,
That's
Okay.
great.
that's true.
Well, now since COVID, snow days are becoming less and less popular as
No
everybody's
kidding.
got the technology to do it.
Is it a virtual day or not?
Exactly. I see so many memes now, like, oh, not gonna have a snow day anymore.
No kidding.
I'm assuming then you've learned Greek. Is that the case?
Yeah, I've quite a bit of Greek, but our school is all in English, so it's an American international school, and
That's cool.
Okay.
most of our work is done in English. Yeah, so
Cool.
I'm 32 years in education now, and mainly have taught social studies in the high school. So since then, I've pivoted into administration in the last 3 years, and done a lot of work with professional development as well. So the equity maps is really developed out of an intersection of work with students and adult learners and finding ways to make conversations and dialogue more equitable so we can get everyone into the conversation.
Love it.
That's cool. Now, I mean, so in the midst of all this international, travel, 32 years in K-12 education, what drives you then to start the tool that we've been talking about? So equity maps. What kind of drove you to be like, I don't have enough time on my hands. I feel like I'm going to just start an app now too. Because why not?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen a lot in 30 years in education, but the central part of my teaching style has always been putting students at the center and finding ways to engage them. And equity maps is a way to make the classroom more inclusive, but also to make conversations visible. When we think about conversations, how often do we step back at the end and debrief and really talk about the processes just as much as the content that we took away from the experience? So all of my career, I've tried to find ways to engage students so that learning is not only more effective, but more memorable and more long term. And if there's one thing that I've learned in the last 30 years is, the more diverse the group that we can put together, and we ask them the right question or give them the right process, the most amazing things can happen when we bring out the perspective, the approaches, and the viewpoints. So equity maps really came out of this intersection of work to give all students, a voice in the classroom and find ways to increase true dialogue where they generate knowledge, where they generate understanding.
Mm.
And, part of it was early in my career, I was so sick and tired of the loudest voice in the faculty meeting, getting the attention. You both been there, I'm sure, right?
Yeah.
No, never. What are you
Never.
talking
Everybody
about?
usually speaks equally. I don't know what you're talking about.
So in the classroom, I've tried to build some intentional patterns into making that conversation visible so that we could improve with feedback rounds, and leverage the reflection of the group. The coolest thing about equity maps is I never wanted to create a summative assessment. I never wanted to create a summative assessment platform, a tool to grade students. And what's
Yeah.
really cool is that users see that. They see it as formative assessment to provide more information to deepen that reflection afterwards.
One of the things that Josh and I think would probably resonate with in what you're just saying, but that's a part of our experience of being, this instructional support, whether it's design or instructional technology. We often have to step into an instructor's method, reflect on it, dissect it, and find where's the breakdown, maybe in the delivery to the students or in the students' understanding of the delivery. Is there a way that we can improve the method, make it more clear, et cetera, et cetera? You know what I mean? And everything you're saying there about the the nexus of equity maps is like why we exist, why we do what we do. You know, if it's in this case you're talking specifically discourse, but for us it's sometimes just like how they write a paper or how they do a video project, or you know, that kind of thing, where we build that out in an online or sometimes face-to-face context, to make that more explicit for the students. Because one of the things that I've found, I don't know if you resonate with this, Dave, but faculty very often, instructors very often have so much content knowledge, content expertise, but they don't necessarily have that pedagogical background. Some of them do. In higher education, we definitely find that, you know, there's so many folks who get a PhD in something, right, but have never taught in a classroom in their lives until they're meeting with us for the first time. K-12, or at least in the, you know, the primary, secondary schools context, I think it's more expected that they have pedagogical training, but some folks still come from different backgrounds than that and don't have that, I guess, level set to be able to do what you just said. Step into the process, analyze what's going on, try and determine how's the best way to reach the students, create a routine for the students to go and all that. It's very interesting. And now that you've delivered that in equity maps, do you find that your process that you've been doing for 30 years is what equity maps is, or has equity maps helped you refine and create the process that you want to use?
Yeah, that's a great question, because look, over the years, I've tried to bring students into the conversation more and more often. I'm thinking back, even at the beginning of my career, I taught a leadership class. And I remember sitting down with the students on the ground, and we were discussing various questions of the things that were going to take place that year in the school. And literally, we had a ball of yarn that we would toss to the person across who was speaking next. And that yarn would unfold. You know, you've probably seen pictures of that. And I know I wasn't the first one to do that 28
Right.
years ago, 30 years ago. But it was really cool as the visual appeared across the room and the students could see how they were connected. You know, it's not only an icebreaker, but it's a way of connecting them and their ideas and making sure that everyone had a chance to speak. So we've always tried to bring in, I say we often because I taught much of my career, I've taught in integrated team-based teaching approaches, where
Okay.
I've team taught with an English teacher often. So I'm a social studies teacher by trade, and we integrate to teach a team-taught integrated course. So we bring in a lot of methods like Socratic seminars or literature circles, in which students are engaging in the text, in uncovering the historical period or whatever it is we're discussing.
Right.
So I would say equity maps became a tool for improving those processes and for pointing out or allowing the group to see how they could improve their own processes. You know, I think that's the best part of 21st century education, is we're looking at the agency of the students and how do we develop independence and give them the skills, because it's so much less about the content and so much more about the skills and the problem solving and the communication. So equity maps really came out of that. And as I'm connecting with more and more users, finding that they're using it for the same reasons is what's so exciting. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah,
Now,
really cool.
that actually sounds like you've already answered our second question. You know, that point of saying, "Oh, it's so exciting," right? He smiled, right, Josh? I mean, he smiled as he's saying it.
They usually do. It's the it's the tool that you've created. And it's really cool that, like I've seen the yarn technique before, but like the kind of seeing that inspiration in the tool that you've created, but with a less cumbersome way of dealing with it. Because while the yarn is really good, eventually run out of yarn, you get a lot of yarn going on in the classroom. Like this, you're having good discussion. So yeah, it's you've kind of already answered that one part of just like the ease at which it helps you kind of track that conversation, because I think that's the piece that can so often get lost in those conversations. Like you said, the person that keeps talking all the time, like we all know them. We have a picture of a human being somewhere in our head right now of that person, and I love them dearly. But like there's always, I think what I loved about equity maps when we were talking about it in our previous episode where we highlighted you guys is that it's my past experience with instructors and even teachers, both in K-12 and higher ed, has been kind of like this, well, if you're not talking, then you don't care and you're not engaging. But kind of this reality of how easy it is to get lost in a conversation. And speaking as the person who, while yes, I'm talking on a podcast right now, I didn't talk a lot in high school. because I was a nerd of wonderful things. And so like just being able to like give a visual to that and trace that to be able to make those connections, and also then try to make the conversation more equitable.
Well,
Yeah,
and
I really
Josh,
love that concept.
and your point here, Josh, really emphasizes too that it's equity maps is not a tool to measure the success. It's to provide feedback of what you were trying to accomplish. So the first thing is to ask the group, what was our goal today, and what do you see in the map, and what do you see in the data that shows that was possible, that was on the right track. It's all about intention, then looking at the data to see, did that meet the intention. We always open it up when I'm using it personally. I'm always opening up to a dialogue and reflection at the end. And my favorite question to ask is just to show various pieces of the data. Okay, one is the map, where you see the conversation unfold, and it unfolds visually in fast forward. You can play back a 20-minute conversation in less than a minute, and so you see how it unfolded. Then I like to show them the data, the amount of time that people talked, the students talked, the number of times they spoke. And, you get the guys who are competing, and sometimes you get the quiet souls thinking, oh, I talked a little bit more than before. But what always comes out of that is the question, what do you notice? This question is the perfect question, because knowing what we wanted to do today, what do you notice in the data? And I remember this, especially this one comment from a girl. Everyone was looking at the data, and one of the pieces it tracks is silence. It talks, it maps the amount of time each person spoke, but it also has silence. It has chaos if multiple people are talking at the same time. It has many of these things that you can measure. But one of the things that stood out is silence. And when I asked, what do you notice? A student raised his hand and said, I noticed that we were only silent once in that 30-minute Socratic seminar. And then I always ask the follow-up question, did anyone else see that? Was that a good thing? They said, yeah, that's a good thing, because it says we knew our stuff. We knew what we were talking about. We were well prepared. And I asked that a couple of times. Did anyone agree with that? I always then ask, does anyone see that differently? And I remember this young girl's hand. She raised her hand and she said, that silence made it really, really difficult for me to get involved. And she said, I didn't speak until the end because it was going so fast and changing pace or changing topics so often. She said, I didn't have a chance to think and react. And then I asked the question, does anyone else feel that way? And then two more hands go up.
Yep.
And that was the reflection that came out of the data. And the students organically brought that to the surface. And then at the end, we set goals for the next conversation. We always say in our next conversation, in our next dialogue, what can we take from this to build on it and set goals for a more improved process next time? The group of students themselves, only by asking that question, said, we need to take more time to be silent so that she can participate. And it was so cool. And they did just that. They were okay with pausing. They were okay. And the levels of involvement went up. So there's an example of where it organically comes from the data. And it's definitely not intended to grade the students, intended to provide them a mirror.
Right.
That was a question I wanted to ask you guys. When you look into a mirror, how often do you look into a mirror? Now, this is not a moment of anything, any question other than this interview, but how often do you look in the mirror, and why are you looking in the mirror? What are you looking for?
It's for me, it's probably like 2 or 3 times a day. I know in the morning, getting up, just brush your hair real quick kind of thing. It's functional. At the end of the day, my wife and I, we've got vanities side by side. So she's brushing her teeth, I'm brushing my teeth. That's, you're looking in the mirror at that moment. Besides that, throughout the day, maybe you just like catch a glance. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like it's only in the morning when I'm in the bathroom, or like if I go to the bathroom at work, like take a look at the mirror, make sure I didn't look like an idiot. Mornings like, getting ready, making sure, like I've got a big beard, Dave, and it does weird things when I wake up in the morning. So it's pretty much just like, make sure the beard's straight and the hair doesn't look horrible. And then I'm presentable as I go sit at my desk most of the day answering questions for instructors. That's yeah, I feel like that's my
And
mirror moment.
there you go, your mirror moments, and there are time in checking in for yourself to see if you're on the right track for the moment of the day. Are you professional enough for the
Right.
day? Are you ready to see the world or your boss, for whatever the case may be? And I wonder. And so equity maps, I see it as really providing the students and teachers a mirror. Um,
Yeah.
a mirror into their conversations. And I wonder how often we present mirrors for students rather than feedback, direct feedback or mirrors so that they can reflect on their learning. And I know you guys are in higher ed mainly, but you can relate to providing feedback to others. And one thing I've done quite a bit of work with is the idea of a third point of communication. And there's some research that shows that when we don't talk to a person or about a person, but about the actions that they're performing, this third point of communication can remove that direct line of feedback or criticism. So I'm not criticizing you for the amount of time you spoke. I'm noticing that Will spoke twice as much as Joss. That's not the case, I'm sure, but it's by
Depends on the episode.
Yeah, or the topic.
by using the data as a third point, we're referring to the data and not to the person. And I think that opens up the conversation and improves the potential dialogue and inclusion that we're after.
Well, and thinking through thinking through the yarn thing, like I've actually never done that. I mean, when you said that, I was like, duh, that's what actually equity maps does. It's something, but I was like, when you said that, we had previously joked about the person who maybe talks a little too much. I'm just thinking like that person in a conversation like that, holding half of the ball of yarn, like running out of space in their hand. Like I can't hold anymore. And hopefully there's that mirror moment of like, I need to shut up. But I'm like, I had this just exaggerated scenario play in my mind as we were saying that, like, oh man, that actually sounds really awesome, because some folks, are more inclined to self-reflection, have that agency to reflect on their own time. But some folks need an external moment of someone holding the mirror up to them and saying, do you notice anything? Is there? And I think that like physically holding too much yarn could be that standout. But your graphs are definitely a moment there where I think folks can see that visually. I don't think it has that as immediate of a feedback loop as the yarn. That's so immediate. Every
Right.
time you talk, you get another piece of it. Whereas the data, and I'm not saying this as a criticism or an issue, right? But
Not
it's
at
just
all.
now we have to be more aware of the reflection and make sure the students are activating that as soon as we're done the discussion, so that they don't lose the value of that feedback point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really about activating that metacognition. So when they leave the
Yeah.
conversation, it's the thinking that lasts, because they're thinking about not what they were saying, but how they were saying it and how they might say that differently depending on where they're at or who they're with. So that's such a good point. And I'm thinking of teachers. There are a lot of use cases of equity maps, and as I'm learning more and more from different users,
I think he was just saying it was like his best point, basically. Just
my only good point. Come on.
Well, so for the audience's sake, you may have just missed the last 5 minutes that I've edited, but we're going to come back into the conversation. Dave was queuing up this reflection point of having maybe an outsider step into the classroom and use equity maps to map the discourse in a classroom. So take it from there for us, Dave. How does that work? Or how
Sure.
have you seen that
For
practiced?
administrators, one of our roles is to evaluate teachers in a K through 12 system, and stepping into that role using equity maps. I've heard from many users who have mapped out the classroom lesson that went on that day, and in the reflection and the follow-up, the post-observation debrief with the teacher, it's so interesting to pull out that data and ask the teacher, what was it exactly you were trying to accomplish that day? What were the learning objectives, and what did you want to unfold? And then to show them the data. And so many times when I've used it myself in those situations, the wow factor, jaws drop, and it's like, wow, I spoke 70% of the time, or wow, only 60% of the students contributed, or the opposite.
Yeah.
Wow, the students were, engaged the entire time. They were in their small groups. Everyone participated. Both scenarios exist. And it's just really interesting to see that third-party data. It's that third point again, to raise the conversation rather than simply to criticize and say you talk too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
They realize for themselves rather than you telling them.
And that's a pedagogical point that started, like I got that in undergraduate. I remember I was learning to teach English as a second language, and one of my first lessons, I mean my first two lessons, they stand out to me, was one, you grade what you assign, so that was an easy one, and that stuck with me for forever. You can't lose that. But two is, like, in language acquisition, the balance of teacher talk time versus student talk time. If you're trying to teach students a language, they need to speak. And one of the things that I think we can parallel, and make the analogy between language acquisition and anything acquisition, is they need to engage the content. It doesn't mean that everybody has to speak the entire time about Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address to learn about the Gettysburg Address. Of course not. But that is a measure that you can use. Is there conversation happening where people are engaging with the topic of the day and speaking about it themselves, or reframing ideas, or sharing a question that could push someone else? Those things all help learning last.
Absolutely.
And it's so explicit in language, but it's so cool to see it in those other areas.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it fits in other areas. And that's what I like about what you guys are doing in equity maps, and some of the and we've seen this across some of the other tools we've been looking at, which is, I think maybe you and Will, you and I maybe have like a bent that we keep looking at when we come into like this discussion kind of world. It's that we need to teach people how to actually be able to discuss ideas and thoughts. And that's what I love about what you're doing, is essentially, like, we're not just talking about what we're talking about. We're making sure we're doing it in a way that's beneficial, that's helpful, and is also helping the students and even the instructors see how their discussions are going, and reflecting and learning on how they can get better each time. And I think that's what I really like about it. It's this idea of just being able to, like, learn you're teaching the students how to be able to actually discuss ideas, have these types of discussions, and at the same time learning the concepts that they're learning. And both are so beneficial, and I think it's too often overlooked in other educational spaces, especially in our area in higher ed, where that's kind of sage on the stage sometimes, where it's not, we forget about the importance of teaching people how to actually discuss ideas and discuss them well, and work on that.
Absolutely. And one thing that surprised me on the point that you were making, Will, it's a fifth grade user. She often says to me that, the one doing the talking is doing the learning. And I've been so surprised how elementary school teachers, there's one user who's used the app. She teaches third grade, and she was using it with her third graders for them to analyze how much they talked in their small group and how they were using that to set goals for the next time. She's actually from New Zealand, this woman, and they say equity maps rather than equity maps. And when the kids talk about it, they're setting goals in third grade. So it's never too early. And I don't know how we missed that into higher ed. We get it in our graduate. What happens, I don't know, but it's too bad. That's one place where we should market this tool for sure. Yeah.
So here's a question right off the list. I mean, we send you questions ahead of time. You've got some time to prep, but like, we have nailed them. We didn't even have to ask.
You're like just easily transitioning into every single thing we wanted to talk about.
Well, I super appreciate the conversation. This is fun. It's fun just to talk about.
You're a grade A interviewee. Are there any fun things we can expect from equity maps? Are there big changes that you've got on the horizon? Anything like that?
Well, we're always looking. We came out with a new update just a couple of months ago now. It's a couple of months ago, but new update. And we've got some improved participant analytics, for example, where you can go in and the teacher can review each time student spoke. So if you meet with a student afterwards, you can go in and just focus on each time Will spoke or each time Josh spoke. We've also added identity markers, which you can categorize students into groups. So if you want to track by language level, if you want to track by proximity in the room, for example, you can set up the codes any way you want. some users wanted to track by race and by language level or grade, and they were able to put that into the app and then gather the data accordingly. So some of these that are currently in, they're brand new. People are just discovering their uses.
Awesome.
I would really like to put in the debrief. I'm really into spinners and random selectors to select people. And I'm going to put into we're going to put into the feedback frames in the debrief a randomization spinner, so that when the teacher is doing the debrief, if they want to randomly call on someone, they can hit the spin function and the random spinner with those group members. So that might be kind of fun to open up the reflection.
I love that idea.
Yeah, that should be kind of fun.
That's really cool. It's fascinating. I've loved all these interviews, frankly, because we get to talk with, in a sense, entrepreneurs, but folks who are innovating. You're trying to fix something, or you're trying to address something. And too often, not too often, but in each of our interviews to date, we spend almost as much time talking about pedagogy as we do talking about the tool.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that. Has been true today, Dave. I think you mentioned you had a surprise for us. There was something you wanted to.
Yeah, you ran an equity maps on us.
Yeah,
is what
that's true.
What
and
you're mentioning.
That's true, and I would like to share that with you. I would like to share. Can I share one more example of something? Because I would be remiss. I had a chance to observe a teacher who was using equity maps, and it just got to the core of what we're trying to do. And she had broken up her class into groups of 4 or 5. They went out in the courtyard of their school, and each group had their own iPad with their equity maps. And they were assigned a chapter or a section of the chapter, and they sat there in their groups. The teacher was afar. I mean, the students were set free to talk and dialogue for 25 minutes. And afterwards, they were mapping it individually on equity maps. And afterwards, the teacher could listen to every single dialogue. So it was as if they were there. The students shared their takeaways. And when they came out of that experience, it was every student had a voice. And, we've been through the ages of differentiation, and now we're not into leveled classes, and all students have a chance in those groups to participate, to give their best, to share their impact. And I just think it was such a cool thing to boost agency and efficacy of these students. And I see it as a huge use. So speaking of equity maps and you two guys, I mapped the interview that you did with the founder of VoiceThread. It was Steve. What's Steve's last name?
Steve Muth.
Steve Muth.
Yeah, Muth.
I really enjoyed that, by the way. So what do you think if you were to guess among the three of you who had the most talk time in that episode? Who do you think had the most talk time among the three of you?
You go first, Josh.
Yeah, I was gonna say you have the advantage of seeing the edit stuff. I mean, I want to say Steve because it was the interview. I hope we gave the interviewee more time, but maybe we didn't.
1 point. 1 point for Josh. Of course, that was your goal to interview. So Steve had he spoke for 25 minutes, and in those 25 minutes, he had 53% of the airtime. And now, who do you think had more airtime, Josh or Will, in that episode?
I mean, I'm gonna go again. I'm gonna go with Will because I have a tendency sometimes to speak a little less during our interviews, or at least I think I do. Maybe I have a bad perception of myself in these interviews.
So as debriefs go, Will, I'll ask: do you see it differently, or do you tend to agree with Josh?
So we have the routine that I start the interviews, which makes me think it might be slanted towards me at least. But then I know that we record an intro and outro separate from the interview, so that's kind of throwing off my perception. I'm thinking in the context of the VoiceThread one that I still was number 2 after Steve.
So the results are, drum roll, Josh spoke 26% of the time in that episode, and Will spoke 21% of the time in that episode.
Really? Whoa! Look at that.
However, the total number of times were almost equal. Josh spoke 42 times, Will spoke 45 times. And the equity quotient, which is kind of cool, if it were 100%, all three of you had equal time and equal number of times. And the equity quotient was 82%, which is really high for any dialogue among 3 people. So that's pretty cool.
Well, pat on the back, I guess.
Yeah, nice work.
I like that. No, that is awesome to think through,
That's
though,
so
because
cool.
it is something we have to wrestle with. This is virtual; it's
Yeah.
not real. We want everybody to talk, but Josh knows we both have had
Of
episodes,
course,
and
Oh
I've
yeah.
seen it in the edit where it's like just this 10-minute chunk of one of us
Yeah.
talking on
Oh,
something.
100%. And the ones I can pick out are as the joke in our podcast, Dave, is that like, so there's kind of a way that the topics for episodes come up. Like so we have conversation, and then we have like an app that we talk about in our regular episodes. And as much as I love technology, Will knows way more apps than I ever do. And so the episodes that are clearly Will talking more are the ones where he threw out an app that I had zero clue what it was. And we're just like, okay, yeah, we'll do it. And then I forget to look into it before the episode.
love it. Well, that's the purpose of the group. Someone's there to help you out and
Yeah.
inform you. That's for sure. The less knowledgeable other is the one that can perhaps get the most information.
And that's a moment where holding all the yarn isn't always the worst thing.
There you
Yeah.
go.
There's something to be said for expertise and that person being able to or willing to share it. But then there's that, you always have to have that internal balance of like, have I talked too much? Should I ask more questions? Should I just
Yeah.
provide some silence?
Yeah.
Well,
that's really cool.
I really appreciate you guys helping to spread the word about equity maps and getting into the more hands of more users. And as we look ahead, we're hoping to branch it into other platforms, of course, and that's the next goal, so we can get it out there for many more users. Turn this passion project into more of a mission to extend inclusive classrooms across the globe. Really, that's the goal.
I love it. And frankly, while I've taken a pivot in my professional career at the moment, I'm not in higher ed for this minute. I'm hoping, honestly, because there's a big push at my company and so many others, right, for diversity and equity. We currently have kind of titled our efforts called Diversity and Impact, right? So our corporation's trying to make this effort of saying, how are we being sensitive to all within, but also what is the impact of our company on the world without, right? So we're looking in and we're looking outward and making sure that that's balancing. Like we want to make sure that as we do good inside, that's becoming a part of the fruit, if you will, the crop that's going outside. So I'm poised in learning and development to even bring equity maps to corporate. We'll see.
Yeah.
I've got my fingers crossed.
Fantastic.
I think that would be really fun.
I would secretly map the first conversation just to show the boss afterwards, because I think it would be an
oh my
interesting
gosh,
thing.
yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
You can.
Hey boss, we did an all hands. What do you think about this one?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dave. We really do
Yeah,
appreciate you taking
absolutely.
the time with us. And it's really just such a fun time for Josh and I to like dig in, pick your brains, hear about the background of equity maps or every tool that we get to dig into. This doesn't have to be the end. If you're ever interested and we want to do some follow-ups, we always open to having you back again.
Appreciate it. It's really good. It's great to get to know you guys, and good luck in the new year with your work. You're helping spread the word about good work and inclusive education for sure. Appreciate it. And the good use of these tech tools that are coming out. Love it.
All right. Well, we will, in a moment here, Josh and I will debrief this conversation, but we look forward to you all joining us in each episode on each of these interviews as we get to dig into more folks in 2022 as we're doing season 2 a little bit differently from season 1. So just hang tight for a moment. That was pretty meta. I'm going to say, it was an awesome conversation, but to have had Dave equity maps us.
That was a solid end. I gotta be honest, that was yeah, we've interviewed a bunch of people, but I was really impressed with just like the prep that Dave did before he showed up. Like he listened to some episodes, he had equity mapped us. I really enjoyed that.
And 82 that's like a B-, right?
Yeah, I mean we I'm gonna be honest, I was pleasantly surprised. I was really nervous when he said he equity mapped us because I was like, I don't know if I talk a lot during the interviews. I was like, It's like, oh, I'm gonna be like 10%.
Well, and the goal of an interview is to, have that person
Yeah,
speak.
I was
So
happy
like,
that Steve was the main number.
yeah,
It was gonna
yeah.
really suck if he was like, yeah, you two talked way more than Steve. I was like, oh no, oh no,
Maybe you should improve your interviewing
maybe
skills.
stop talking. Yeah, I was like, dang it, I'm the Jimmy Fallon of podcasting.
Oh,
Ooh, yeah,
snap.
I went there. Anyway,
Mm. So yeah, I found that really just insightful. It's always cool to see behind the curtain, what they're working on, how to come together, whatever. But like, again, Dave just cares about the pedagogy, and he's actively been a teacher. He's a principal
oh yeah,
now. Like
absolutely.
he's deep in
You
it.
can tell how the education and pedagogy has driven, which you mentioned it when we were talking to Dave. Like we're always pleasantly surprised whenever we get to do these interviews with apps that we've talked about. Like most of them, it comes back to the pedagogy that drove the tool.
Yeah.
And I think that would be a comment reminder to, if you're listening to us, you're an instructor in higher ed or whatever you're doing. I feel like I come across this a lot with instructors, that it's like they forget that these educational tools, the good ones, actually have people behind them that care about pedagogy in the way. So they're doing this out of a need that they see, out of some pedagogical need. And Equity Maps is a good example of that. And especially his example of doing us. Well, it was only with 3 of us. It immediately proves the helpfulness of it. It's like when you get into a conversation or you have a full classroom of students, we have a perception of how that's all going, or even
Right.
small groups. Students have a perception of how it's all going, and it's not always reality. So that's what I really like about Equity Maps. It gives you this avenue to both track that, not to punish students who aren't talking a lot, but actually track where conversations go, how things are happening, and how certain elements of the conversation affect people's ability to equitably talk during class, and get engaged. And almost like he mentioned, people talking often are also learning in the midst of what they're doing. So if they're quiet the entire time, now I have some of my own opinions about how all that plays out, but Equity Map still, I think, does a really good job of capturing that. You could kind of see that in the background of how they set stuff up.
Yeah, and I think that there's something in the fact of like this tool showing up in the classroom. It's the mirror moment. It is the mirror,
Yeah.
right? Like when I host a discussion, or if I'm just asking questions in the classroom, the students may not be thinking that there's no responsibility for them to engage, right? They don't necessarily know, like if the professor asks, what happened in 1865, like maybe one student answers the question, but like nobody's saying at that very moment, I'm responsible for engaging in this, right? And if you bring in Equity Maps in, it's like, all right, everybody's aware of the fact that they're being tracked, and so they have this kind of conscientiousness of like, I should say something. I should try to engage at some point.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think I'm really excited about the group feature that he mentioned that they've added. I didn't realize they added that, because
Yeah.
that also, like, thinking of students in groups. While yes, that could be probably abused. I also I immediately had a use case for us. So we still have students joining through Zoom for
Okay.
classrooms. Like, could you imagine using Equity Maps and then grouping
Mark your
students that
Zoom
day by
students.
Zoom students to see how much are they actually engaging versus the students there, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a really cool feature, and that's what I like about what he's doing. They're building a lot of components of just being able to give tools to instructors to help better lead discussion, and then also bring the students in a reflective practice to see, okay, how are our discussions going as a class? Like what is happening? Like his story about that silence moment was really cool. Like the you start to realize that these students are like, well, because everybody was talking so much, that silence moment was the only moment I was really able to actually engage, because I couldn't keep up with what was going on. And having them all kind of come to this conclusion of, well, we need to pause more, is really cool. So overall, as every one of these interviews does, it makes me want to use the tool more that they're doing, because it's I'm really impressed by what Equity Maps is trying to do. Yeah.
We learn how good it is, and it's like, oh gosh. Yeah, and that's one of the things, the joke is, right, of course, me, apps, whatever. Like I haven't used all of these apps, or if I've used them, like I downloaded it, I checked it out, I know it could do something good, but so this is one of those things where we've got the proof in the pudding of it being used, hearing the stories of its effectiveness, knowing what it's doing, getting better. It really is just such a sweet tool. Well, I don't know. I loved it, and
Yeah.
I think we talked even with a little bit with Dave after the call there, and just said, hey, we could talk about this, or if you want to get that engaged. So there's some future. I think
I think
Equity Maps is going to be back.
I think you'll see equity maps come back in the high tech rotation. You
Yeah.
know,
We love it.
in season
Next
2.
episode, we are wrapping up episode 39 here. Next episode's episode 40. We're going to be talking about podcasting for education.
Yeah.
What?
Like we know
We do
something
that?
about that. Yeah, a little bit. You know,
Wow.
we do that now. We're up to 40 episodes. We're basically
Exactly.
pros.
We're going to be.
You know, so yeah, no,
And
next week
Anchor.
talking about podcasting.
The tool of that episode will be Anchor, which is you know, again, this is a little, it was just meta. Everything here is meta
Yeah,
today.
It's very not to be confused
what we
with
do
Facebook.
all day.
It's,
No,
you know,
not that. No.
Yeah.
I like my privacy. Thank you. As a general reminder, be sure to check us out on Twitter. Make sure you can email us at inbox@hightechpod.us or go to our website, hightechpod.us.us, to engage with any of our episode resources. We really appreciate that. Reviews are great. Find us on Anchor. If you're not sure which platform is best for you or you want to share it to other folks, you can always share that anchor.fm/hightechpod link. And you can share that to folks because then they'll see us on Apple, Google, Spotify, whatever is good for them. So we really appreciate y'all folks engaging with us in that space. Until the next time, when we continue the conversation on harnessing technology in the digital and physical classroom. See ya.
See ya.